So there is one thing that this calculate subtotal function is missing that I didn't realize before we left the previous video, and that is that right now subtotal does not actually take into account the fact that silverware is needed. So let's make sure we update that. So let's say if silverware needed is true, then we want to add in that silverware cost. So we'll do an if-then statement. If silverware needed is true, then we're going to add in subtotal plus equals silverware cost. Now remember that one thing to keep in mind, this will work, this code will work, but because silverware needed itself is a Boolean variable, we can just let it be if silverware needed, because that'll be a true or false statement. We don't need that extra check to see that it's equal to true. So let's run the code. And now we can see everything else is working as expected. And if we set this to be true, then it changes that subtotal, adds an extra $1 in there to say whether or not silverware is needed. So that's working great. So let's continue here with tax and total. So we have a variable that is defined as tax amount, and we have this stored in our app right now as tax amount. And right now it is just set to a constant. So let's get rid of that constant and let's actually calculate what that is going to be. So the tax amount instead, what we want to do is create a new function called calculatetax. And this time, let's make a function have just a single input. Let's make it an amount, and we'll set that amount to be our current total before tax. Okay, now it's going to complain because we haven't defined that variable yet, or we haven't defined that function yet. So let's go down here and write that function. So we're going to write our function, calculate tax. It has one parameter, which is an amount. And we're going to make this return a double because we want it to actually say how much tax there is. This is a simple calculation. To calculate the amount of tax, we multiply the amount by the tax rate, which we have up here as just 0.15, so 15%. So we're going to return that amount. And so this variable tax amount is now, instead of just having a constant value, going to calculate that using the calculate tax function. So let's run it. And so now we can change these. These are still working, and you can see that the tax is now being calculated on top of everything. Okay, so we have one more variable, and that is the total with tax. And we could write a separate function for this, but I want to show you that we don't have to. We can do it right here. It's just sometimes a really good idea to separate the responsibility between the variable being displayed and the function itself. So I could just return the tax amount plus the total before tax. And so now we can see everything is updating as expected. So now that this is working, we can correctly calculate the subtotal, the tax, and the overall total that includes both the tax and the subtotal. So in the next video, we're going to keep going with some of these functions and see if we can get the other functionality for completing the purchase, for saying if you get the free bag, all of that other stuff. We'll move on with that in the next video.